Good morning and welcome to Valley Views. I'm your host, Glenn Edison, and we're certainly glad to have you today. And we're thankful for our sponsor, BTC Fiber. And you can see this interview on their YouTube channel at BTC Fiber YouTube or on Channel 18 on their cable channel. So be looking for that in the future. But today we have with us Dr. Greg Phelps with Alleo Healthcare out of Chattanooga. And Dr. Phelps is a hospice doctor, along with he's got many other letters behind his name as well. He's a pretty exciting man with some of the things he's done over his life. And but one of the first things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Phelps, I know a lot of people, when they hear the word hospice, they think of just death, all automatic, but explain to people just exactly what hospice is.
Okay. Well, first of all, remember that all life is limited. On all of our birth certificates is an invisible expiration date. So hospice is about quality of life when time is short. When time is precious, we want people to have the best life they can. The popular myth is that hospice is around just death and dying, and it's really about living the best life you can. And so when we talk hospice, I steal this from my good friend Bob Goldsmith, that would go in and talk with families about hospice, but without mentioning what we call the H word. Yeah. And he would be seeing them in the hospital and would say, wow, your mom's pretty sick, would it help if we got a hospital bed for her? Oh, that'd be great. Maybe I could get some nurses to come out and help with medications and whatnot. Oh, that'd be fantastic. And she's so sick she can't get out of bed. Maybe if we got a nursing assistant to come help with bathing. And oh yes, this is really, really stressful dealing with somebody this sick. Maybe we could get a social worker, a chaplain to come work with your mom and you to help with the stress. Oh, this is great. You go, what I'm talking about is hospice. So he would have them talking about what they needed without hearing the H word. And that really helped for him to be able to get people to listen. Because unfortunately, the word hospice word is kind of like saying cancer. People the brain freezes up.
Uh-huh.
But it's going to come for all of us. Only about 50% of the U.S. population right now passes away in hospice. And it's all too often it's because no one will tell the patient they're getting close to the end of their life.
Well, and also in hospice, it's if I have this right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's more or less an easing of that time, mm-hmm. making life a little bit more livable.
Right. Well, and the popular misconception, and the author and physician Atul Gawande, MD, who is a surgeon in Boston, said when they talked about hospice, and his dad was a doctor, he said, all I thought hospice was morphine and death.
Yeah.
And he went to go care for his dad and found out he knew nothing about end-of-life care. He knew nothing about what to do for his dad to keep him comfortable in those last weeks and months. And he wrote a book called Being Mortal about what he learned. And on page 1, what he said was, as a doctor, I learned nothing about aging, fragility, or dying. And so they don't teach that in medical school. It's only been 3 years that the University of Tennessee Health Sciences Medical School has required that medical students get exposure to palliative care and hospice, geriatrics, and general when people are in the final chapters of their life.
Well, and that's good because it hasn't always been around as a study.
No, it hasn't. Hospice and palliative medicine is one of the newest specialties there is. It's only been around for about 10 years.
And matter of fact, that was part of your journey.
Mm-hmm.
You started out in River City in Ohio, is that correct?
Well, I was a rural family doctor in Chester, South Carolina, and did a number of different things, taught family practice, ran an occupational health center, and as you mentioned, I'm a compulsive student, so I've been back for a master's in public health. I'm board certified in preventive medicine, went back for another master's in theology as it applies to healthcare. And then when my mother passed away in hospice, I decided I wanted to learn that. So I'd been the medical director for the St. Mary's system in Kentucky and Tennessee when my mother passed away, and I went to go do my fellowship in hospice and palliative medicine at the age of 55.
Wow. So you've been around, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure with all your background, in the medical field, some of your, I guess some of your coworkers in all these places, they didn't necessarily always agree with the hospice theology, right?
No. There are still I was reading something on the internet. It was talking about doctors trying to certify patients in hospice, and a number of doctors had written in going, "This is terrible. They kill people." I mean, it is still a popular rumor that hospice is just about end of life as opposed to quality of life towards the end. And so we're trying to change the culture, one conversation at a time.
Well, and even in end of life, there are times, as you're well aware of, that people are they're in a lot of pain, depending on their situation, and in your case, you're there to ease that pain and make it more livable for them.
Well, and there's to diverge into theology for a moment. There's a ethical principle actually written by St. Thomas Aquinas back in the 1200s called the rule of double effect, which is if my goal is to do a good thing but a bad thing could happen, as long as they are proportionate, it's morally acceptable to do that. And so the statistics show that people live longer in hospice than they do without hospice because they have their pain controlled, because they're made sure that they're cared for, because they're having their issues, anxiety, depression, whatever, dealt with. There's a survival benefit in hospice of about 3 months, according to a number of studies, not just one, but a bunch of them. And so if people are not groaning in pain, they live longer.
Right, and I noticed in your book, and by the way, Education of a Hospice Doctor, that is his book that he's written, very good book. But I noticed one of the characteristics in that book is actually sitting down and actually talking to the patients, and as you would anybody.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of funny because in medical school, one of the 6 core competencies of a physician is communication, and I think some nurses, actually, I mentioned this to a group of nurses I was talking to last week, and they burst out laughing because doctors are so bad about communicating. The average physician interrupts the patient within 18 seconds. They introduce themselves less than a quarter of the time. Most patients in the hospital, unless it's a smaller hospital like you might find here, don't know who their doctor is. I work with UT Medical Center, I've worked with Erlanger, I've worked with all the hospitals in Chattanooga, and the patients frequently, because they have hospitalists and intensivists and nocturnalists, they don't know who their doctor is, and more than half the time, according to studies, they don't know why they're there, other than they got sick. So communication is such a vital thing, but we do a lousy job at it. When I was the medical director for a hospital, I had a family come in and complain that the doctor never came to a complete stop in their mother's room. He came in spouting lab tests that they didn't understand, said we're going to do this tomorrow, and he'd walk back out patting her on the shoulder. And I said, does he wear a long white coat? Because I knew he did. And they said, yeah, and I said, grab it. And they did, and he came over to share his feelings about my proposed intervention, because they said, well, Dr. Phelps said, grab your lab coat. And he said, I was in there an hour. And I said, you probably needed to be. But the only thing a physician has to sell, per se, is their time and expertise. So the system is designed for bad communication. The gift that I have in hospice and palliative medicine is to be able to sit and talk with patients. If I see 6 patients in a day, I've had a busy day. But it is so important because you can do the wrong thing, the bad thing, over and over and over again and get paid for it, but not really serve the patient. So my elevator speech, and I was asked in an elevator, what do you do? And I didn't come up with a good answer, is palliative care is about communication, coordination, and comfort. Comfort we've already talked about. Communication is information about diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment, and kind of where's this likely to end. And I always say, I'm not God, I don't know for sure, but this is what I've seen in my experience. And I've been a physician for 40 years. And then coordination is once the patient and their family understand really kind of where they're at, what do they want to do, and getting everybody on that page.
Well, and the communication part, I know even throughout my life, in times I've been with doctors and various things, they spouted out a term, and I'm going, okay, what was that? you
Yeah.
know, and they knew what it was, but I didn't, and I wanted it to be down on my level.
Uh-huh.
And so I think families need that from their doctors.
Well, I tell doctors that most of the U.S. population is medically illiterate. I had a patient one time tell me that they had a neoplasm in their thorax, but thank God they didn't have lung cancer. And neoplasm is cancer, and thorax is your lung. So it is so important. I tell my medical students and my residents, I say, if you're using words of more than 2 syllables, you're probably losing a percentage of the people listening. And it is so important that the patients know what they have. There's a study that said that more than half of patients, when they leave the doctor's office, don't know what happened.
Right. I'm sure they don't.
And one of the nicest things somebody said, I was talking to them about their illness and whatnot, and they said, I like talking to you. You're as plain as dirt. I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I said, no, that is a compliment. That means that I am speaking where I need to be.
Well, it needs to be on everyone's level, and that way they know what to expect, and maybe when to expect it, and maybe not necessarily when, but how it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, that's so important, because so many of our families say, one of the nicest things they say is, when Dad did this, you told us about it, and we were ready for it. And then when this happened, we were ready for it. And that means so much, because, for me, this is what I do all the time.
Uh-huh.
But for every family member, this is the first and only time they're going to go through it.
Right.
And so, I went through this with my mother, and, it was so important to kind of know this is what will happen next, and this is what will happen next. One of the things we struggle with is hospice patients that are sometimes almost comatose in the last few days will suddenly wake up. We call it a rally day. And if we don't tell the family, they think, oh my God, it's a miracle, Mama's getting better. We say, it's a theological moment of grace to talk, but they usually tend to slip back in and slip away. Right. But if they're not prepared for that, then they get so disappointed, and they're, oh my God, what happened? Because they go back down again.
Right, and I've seen that with some of my family in the past, where you just weren't aware of what was going on, and then it happened, and you weren't expecting it to happen.
Yeah. Well, and families so often think, when they've had catastrophic illness, particularly in the elderly, it's one thing breaks the next thing, that breaks the next thing, that breaks the next thing. So I've had families that, their loved one who had some dementia had gotten pneumonia, they went to the hospital and they got a clot in their lungs, and then they ended up in the ICU, and they're thinking they're going to go home and be walking in the fields again. And I have to be the one to say, probably not. Based on my experience, they're probably going to be in the bed the rest of their life. And it's at that point the family goes, oh, well, they wouldn't want all this. I had one family, the patient was on dialysis, a ventilator, and a heart assist. And I sat down and said, tell me what he would like. What's important to him? And they said, well, the first thing we want to say is he wouldn't want to be on life support. And I have to admit that I kind of almost burst out laughing, because he's on 3 life supports right now.
Yeah.
And they said, oh my God, he wouldn't want that. And we made a very different change. I told them the chances of him going home and doing what he was doing before were as close to 0 as I was willing to say.
Yeah, and there again, it's just like you say, it's people's ignorance, because they're not medically qualified, so they want to expect the best, and hope for the best.
But we always hope for the best, but we always want to plan for the worst.
Yes.
And so often their physicians won't talk about what's the likely outcome. And I've been wrong. I do hope for the best. I do believe in miracles. But at the same time, most people want to know what is the likely outcome as well.
I know in my liver transplant I had 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
First thing the doctor told me before we went in, he says, well, you might die. And I thought, well, that's nice to know. I'm going to wake up dead, But, it was one of those things, he just went over it. He said, well, here's the situation. He said, we don't think so. He says, but it could be.
Well, and that brings me to another point that I always like to make for your listeners, and that is about advanced care planning. It is so important to do an advanced care plan, when you're young, when you're older and having chronic health conditions, when you're developing a life-threatening illness. You can go online at honoringchoicestn.org and get the forms. Hospice of Chattanooga provides them, called the 5 Wishes. But that's a gift you give your family to say, if this happens, don't keep me alive. My mother joked about, hey, she was going to, because she really didn't want to be resuscitated, she was joking she was going to have DNR tattooed on her chest. So where you'd put the paddles, go, well, maybe not.
Yeah.
But it is so important that we do it, because it's a gift you give your family saying, this is what I want, rather than the family having to try to figure it out. And frequently they don't know, they don't talk about it. An instance is coming up next month. We call it Talk Turkey Day. Some people call it Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
To talk with your family and say, oh, I heard a crazy doctor being interviewed about what I would want. Because it's the conversation with your family about what that's so important.
Well, and your family needs to know just in case.
Yeah.
Because we all, as I've said before, we don't try to think about death because that's kind of morbid to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a real thing, and we need to think about it some.
Yeah.
And to have a plan so our family would know, instead of them having to go through a long process. Because just because someone's in hospice care, that doesn't mean they're going to die right away. They could live for a long time.
Oh no. The benefit is intended for 6 months, but it can go for years if the patient has the same life-threatening, life-ending illness. They were talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She had pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. That's an extraordinary period of time to live. She qualified for hospice 4 years ago, but only died, a month ago?
Yes. Yeah.
And but she just kept fighting on. So.
Well, and maybe you can elaborate on this about being positive about your health.
Mm-hmm.
I know we try to stay healthy, and sometimes we don't always make the best eating choices or health habits, but if we have a positive attitude, that helps along, doesn't it? No?
It absolutely does. I don't think you can think yourself out of cancer,
Right.
but I think that being forward thinking about it and trying to take care of your health, it's kind of like people I see that have smoked their entire life and then come up with lung cancer, and they're like, how could that happen? I'm like, seriously?
Yeah.
But it is every day you have an opportunity to make a better choice for being healthy. If I could, I was going to mention a little bit of difference between palliative care and hospice. Is
Sure,
that okay?
I want you to. I was going to
Okay.
get around to that.
And that is palliative care, like I mentioned, my elevator speech is around the 3 C's: comfort, communication, and coordination. Hospice is a subset of palliative care. I mentioned I did my fellowship in Kentucky, which is the bourbon capital of the world, and I learned that all bourbon is whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. So all hospice is palliative care with those 3 C's, but it's for patients who have a 6-month prognosis and they're not looking for aggressive care. Palliative care is a much bigger circle around hospice for patients who are still looking for aggressive care, still looking to live longer than 6 months, but they need help with the palliative care is defined as an extra layer of support for patients and their families going through the stress of serious or life-threatening illness, and it's delivered by a team. So we have social workers, chaplains, all that in palliative care. Hospice has more of that with nurses and CNAs and medical equipment, but that's the difference, and we do both.
Oh, okay. You do both. Well, that's good to know, and that way, I know a lot of times when this comes up with families with hospice that they're overwhelmed,
Mm-hmm.
and they really don't know what to do or how to go about getting things.
Well, and I had a doctor I was caring for his mother, and as we were walking out of her hospital room, he patted me on the shoulder and says, I don't know how you do what you do. I don't know how you sleep at night. And then he walked away, and I said, whoa, wait, I want to answer that. And I said, I sleep good. We come in with families at the worst possible time. There's a life-threatening, life-ending illness. They're in pain. They're suffering. They don't know where to go next. And we make that better. We get their pain under control. We come out with a treatment plan of what we're going to do. We start imposing order on chaos. And I said, and our patients suffer less. They live longer. Their care costs less. I said, I sleep fine.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to make people feel better.
Yeah.
Because I know no one wants to feel bad.
Right. Well, this is the most rewarding thing I've done. I've done a little bit of everything, and I find this by far the most rewarding thing I've done. I work with chaplains every day. We talk about the meaning of life. I'm currently the president of the Chaplains Association in Chattanooga, which is kind of strange. I wanted to mention, to get a plug in, we're doing a education for area clergy and health professionals called Book of Life, and it starts actually Thursday. It's online, and you can go to bookoflifechattanooga.org and register. It's free. But we spend time with patients at their most vulnerable. I learn so much from my patients every day. I've cared for somebody who was a bodyguard for Winston Churchill. I took care of a lady who was a switchboard operator in the White House during World War II. The stories I hear from patients are absolutely unbelievable, and I have the opportunity to hear them.
And I'm sure you enjoy this much better than administrative roles you've had in the past.
I do indeed. Sometimes I used to be a medical director of a hospital, and I used to joke the patients are the only people who like me. The doctors thought I was administration, the administrators thought I was with the doctors. So,
yeah, I guess that is a hard road to hoe there.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, if someone needed your services, how would they go about getting in touch with you?
Well, they can go to our website, which is hospiceofchattanooga.org. That's where they can also find out about palliative care. They can also find out about our foundation. We have lots of videos. We do grief support, which you do not have to have been a patient of a Hospice of Chattanooga as well. And that's what our first talk is going to be on, is grief support this coming Thursday. But our website, Hospice of Chattanooga, is the place to go for all that information.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know, because people need it, and there's not a hospice office here. But
well, there's one in Jasper. We're that close.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that.
We have about 12 offices in different communities.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, we're nearby. This is a frequent trek for me to come over and work with the staff.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear. I mean, I didn't realize that we were that close.
Yeah.
And so that's good to know.
So I will mention for your viewers that I wrote the book Education of a Hospice Doctor, and it was about going back to school at the age of 55, which is a little older than most of the people I was with. It's a memoir. It's what I learned and how I struggled through. I had quite a episode getting through that. The people that were in school with me were in their late 20s. The faculty were my daughter's age, and so I had heart problems while I was there. Ended up having a cardiac cath and a few other things. So it's both what did I learn about hospice as well as what I went through.
Yeah, there's if you get the book, there's a lot of neat stories in there. I enjoyed reading them, and it's an easy read book as well. It's not full of a lot of terms and
not a lot of medical jargon. No,
no, it's just straight out stories, and so it's a good story. Well, Dr. Phelps, is there anything you'd like to add before we close?
Let me look at my notes and see. No, I think I hit pretty much everything I wanted to. So,
well, great.
Thank you.
It's certainly good to have you today.
Yeah.
And folks, so make sure you watch BTC Fiber, their YouTube page. It'll be on in just a few days when we get it set up, and also the Channel 18 that comes on at different times. So thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of Valley Views. This is Glenn Edison. You have a great
Brought to you by Bledsoe Telephone Cooperative, your full-service telecommunications provider right here in the Sequatchie Valley.